Hi, everybody. My name is Harper Tooch. I'm the 3D visualization specialist here in the libraries. So I am housed in data services. I am fairly new to the university and I'm hoping to build out a lot of the workshops within the DataLab series to give more content on 3D data and working with 3D data. All right, so moving into Blender, I just wanted to give you a brief background of what we're doing today. So today we're going to be talking about what Blender is. You don't have to have any experience with Blender to be in this workshop. So we are going to start from scratch. So if you do have a little bit of background, we are going to go over the interface and what it does. So there might be some repeat content. Next, I'm going to give you a little brief background of 3D models and some terms and definitions that are important to know when working with 3D models. Next, we're going to talk about actually navigating Blender's interface. This is probably the most important part of learning Blender and probably is the most daunting. So I'm going to break it down for you guys so that you can navigate the interface easily. Next, I'm going to just go over a couple of tools and functions that are in Blender that we are going to be constantly using and different Blender modes that we're going to be using so you guys are comfortable with using them and finding them. And lastly, the bulk of this workshop is going to be actually modeling a 3D model. Today, we're going to be modeling a coffee mug. So you guys will be able to have a final project that you can save and show your friends and tell them to come to future iterations of this introduction workshop. There are materials that you'll need for this workshop, and all of them can either be found by following this link up here or using this QR code. And the folder will look like this. If right now everybody could go to this folder, the URL can be found here or in your email. So woostel.box.com/v/intro to Blender. If you can go to that and please download the wood table JPEG, we will be using this later. So I'm just going to make sure that I also have it downloaded. Great. And you can also find, for those online, you can find the instructions for what we will be doing later, making our coffee mug in here, as well as there's this handy shortcut. If you click this link, push OK. So this is some Blender shortcuts. This shows the basic Blender shortcuts that we have with some interactive GIFs of actually what they do. I have also written them on the top of the instructions, all of the shortcuts that we will be using today, but I find that this is very helpful. So after, if you're interested in continuing 3D modeling, you can always go to this website and see all of the different shortcuts because there are a lot. All right, so what is Blender? Blender is a great free open source 3D suite. You can actually do the entirety of the 3D pipeline within Blender. So this can be quite daunting. Today, we are just going to be looking at modeling, but you can do rigging, animation, simulation, rendering, motion capture. Last night, if anybody watched the Oscars, Flow, the animated short series, Flow was actually created in Blender. So if you're interested in what can be created in Blender, go ahead and watch Flow because the possibilities are really endless. And something that's really nice about Blender itself is that it is supported by all operating systems. So no matter what computer you have, you can access Blender, and also it is portable. The only downside to having it portable is it is a little bit slower because you are using that external hard drive. All right, so introductions to some 3D models. Basically, 3D models are comprised of different data points. And so the overall data that we look at is called a mesh. And this is a collection of vertices, edges, and faces, also known as polygons, that actually define the shape of a 3D model. So a vertex, if we can see right here, this is an image of Blender and a object that was captured using photogrammetry, which is a process of taking photos and turning those photos into a 3D mesh. You can see that these points right here are vertices, and those then are connecting with an edge. So if you see very small right there, that's an edge. And then a compilation of 3 or more vertices connected creates a face. This is really the data that we are going to be manipulating so that we can work with this 3D data. Next, again, are polygons. So polygons is a shape. It's like a face. You'll hear polygon and face, but this is really just talking about those faces and how many faces there are, which is poly count. So poly count is really important for 3D data artists, designers, anybody working with 3D data. There's a fine balance between having a high quality 3D model and having a low poly count. Because if you have a high poly count, so the number of polygons and vertices on your 3D model, your computer is going to render it very slow. So we want to optimize this count so that we have the least amount of polygons, but still retain a level of detail and a level of perfection when we're looking in these 3D models. So this optimization is pretty important in 3D modeling. And so you'll hear this concept of poly count quite a bit. Next is a texture. So you don't see it in this image right here, but textures are essentially just images mapped onto your model. And this is done through a process called UV mapping. So has anybody taken a sticker and put it on their water bottle? And sometimes you get lumps or have to like smooth it out. It's the same process, just virtually. So we're taking a 2D image and we have to then wrap it around a 3D object. So this process can be quite difficult and take some practice, but through this process of UV mapping, you're able to get that texture on your model perfectly and seamlessly. Next is rendering. So this is a process of creating 3D data, making it more accessible and using different GPUs, so graphics cards on your computers to create an image that then can be stitched together to create a video. And this just allows your 3D data to be processed more easily, as 3D models can be quite big and a lot of data and take a lot of storage. So the process of rendering really shows that final step of your 3D model. Next is geometry, and this is just pretty much the overall shape of your 3D model. So the mesh, the polygons, and the geometry are pretty much all used interspersively. They mean different things, but today we're just going to use them meaning all the same things. And lastly is normals. So each of these different data points has a quote unquote interior and exterior, and normals define the direction of your data point. So later we will be trying to move these data points based on their normals on their axes. And so we have a global axes that you'll see in the scene, and then each data point actually has its individual axes and way it's oriented. So this allows you to move the data points a little bit more easily and also helps with light reflection. So normals are really important in that final rendering process to make sure that your light is hitting your 3D object in the correct way. Because if you have the outside of the normals, so all of your faces pointing inwards, your object is not going to look good and not going to reflect light well. So we want all of those exterior normals facing out so the light can bounce off of your 3D model more easily. So let's talk about Blender. All right. So when you're first opening Blender, the first thing that's going to pop up is this splash screen. And this splash screen is very helpful. The first thing that you'll notice, depending on the version of Blender you have, so we all should be in 4.3, but you will see a little picture, and this changes depending on the version that you are. And this actually shows the possibilities of what you can do in Blender. So this gives you some ideas of different people who have modeled in Blender and who have used Blender to create different 3D drawings, different animations, stuff like that. So this kind of gives you an idea of what's possible. Next, we have the new file content. So this allows you to create a new file that you will be modeling in. So some of the predefined ones, as you can see, 2D animation, sculpting, VFX, video editing, these can be helpful if you're going in and creating something like, say, I'm sculpting an object, which is more of a process of imagining you have a piece of clay in person and you're using techniques like a potter would to mold the geometry of a 3D object. That's what sculpting is versus modeling, which uses more of that geometry to create an object. So this is used more for architecture and whatnot. Sculpting's more for natural forms. So characters in different animated games and stuff like that, they're modeled using sculpting softwares. But this can all be done in Blender. So you can select and create a new folder type based on your goals. Next is your recent files. This is nice because you can go into your recent files that you've used in Blender and bring up your model very easy. All Blender files save the project with a blend.blend file type. So this is Blender's quote unquote proprietary file type, but then you can also export your models into various other file types if you want to put it into, say, Unity to create a game. So that is possible, but this is just allows you to bring up those recent blend files so you don't have to go digging through your folders. Probably this is the most important thing on this splash screen. If you have a project open and for some reason you have so many polygons that your polygon's so high that your machine crashes, this button will save your butt. And I have used it quite a lot. So this will recover your last session. So if that crashes, you can go in. It's probably not going to be exactly where you were. So that's why saving often is important, but it does allow you to get back so you don't have to start your modeling process all over again, which a lot of people who use softwares and even in Word, sometimes your computer can crash and then you lose that essay. So it's really important to save your files, but also this button does help you get back to your file that you last were modeling. So moving to the interface. So after you see that splash screen, a lot of people don't, if you're not doing anything specifically, you can just click off of that splash screen and you will get into the default window setup. So this includes a cube, a camera, and a light. And so I am going to head into Blender. And what we're going to do is just click off of that splash screen. Basically, the default window, we have this camera here. We have a cube, which is a basic mesh, and our light. And these elements can always be deleted prior to modeling and normally are deleted prior to modeling, but they will always populate in your default startup window. Moving on to the interfaces areas, this can be kind of complex and overwhelming for new users, but I'm going to try to break it down so it's easy for everybody to understand. So the first thing that we have is the status bar, and this is located at the very bottom of the window and helps you with those shortcuts, as there are many, and showing relevant information about your 3D modeling. So if I go back into Blender and I click this, you can see I hover over it, left click select. I can rotate my view by holding down the middle mouse button. Oh, another thing I want to mention for those of you on Zoom or using your personal laptops, Blender is a lot easier to use if you're using a mouse, not a trackpad. So if you have access to a mouse, please use that. If not, you can still follow along. It might be a little bit more difficult to use that trackpad, but I highly suggest using a mouse for the process of modeling. But here you can see it gives you those like resize, select, rotate, and object. So if I do my right click, you can see that this object panel pops up as well. So next we have the top bar, and this is very basic and a lot of other softwares have it. So this has your file, your edit, window, help, so you can customize Blender and configure it to your liking. You can save and export and import models. The only difference is it has this render tab, and that allows you to render your final model. So you'll go up there when you're ready to start rendering your 3D model to then export it into creating video or showing your friends the image of the mug you've created, different things like that. And this also contains different workspaces. So as you can see, the workspaces here are up at the top, and these are just the default Blender workspaces. Today, we're going to work primarily in the layout workspace, but as you can see, these have a bunch of different workspaces that changes the configuration of the windows on Blender. So if I go into Blender, so if I go up to the top in Blender and I click on the modeling, as you can see, my screen slightly changed. And as you can see, I've put all of the basic ones that are default in Blender on the screen, and they tell you a little bit more about the workflow and what Blender can do. So the next area in our interface is the workspace. So this is the main space that we're going to be creating your 3D model, animating, doing video editing, stuff like that. And like I said, this configuration changes based on the workspace that you're working in. So the layout workspace has a set of areas that I want to go over before getting started. So the first area we have is the 3D viewport. So this is the main area of Blender where we are actually going to be manipulating the model and creating our mug. And this is where a majority of your work happens. Next, we have an outliner. So if anybody's familiar with Photoshop or any of the Adobe suite, this contains a collection of the objects that you have in your 3D scene, much like layers. So you can go and look at all of your objects. So right now, the default, as you can see, we have the camera, cube, and light. This changes based on what you have in your scene. And you can go in, if you double left click on those, you can actually change the names. And if you're doing a very complex model, changing the names and having good file and data naming conventions is really important. So you know, and if others go into your model, they know what each object is actually doing. Next is the properties panel, and that's on the bottom right. And this tells you the properties of the object that you are looking at. So this has various different functions that we're going to be using today. But basically, whenever you click on something within your scene, you can see the properties within that panel. And lastly is the timeline. We will not be using the timeline at all today, but the timeline is really used for time-based animation. So you can see how your 3D model is moving through time. But today we are not going to use that. And you only really use the timeline if you are doing animations. So within the, it's a lot of different tabs that I'm just trying to go over so you guys are familiar. But within the 3D viewport itself, there are different regions. So we have the main region, like I said, where the majority of the modeling actually happens. We also have the header, and this contains common menus, different tools that we're going to be using, and different modes that we can switch between within Blender. Next, we have the toolbar, and you can see that I have put a T in parentheses in the slide. So that is actually the shortcut. If you don't see your toolbar, if you press T, it will become visible. And if you want to hide it, you can also press T. Next is our transform or sidebar menu. This contains different settings about your object. This really helps you define and fine tune your object. Today, we will not be using it, but it does come in handy once you get into more advanced modeling. And lastly is this adjust last operation panel. And this is actually very important. If you run a tool and you don't like how it looks, you can fine tune your model by opening this panel and going back and adjusting it and fine tuning it. So we will be using this panel, and it also gives you extra settings with some tools that we'll be using that we can go in and change. And it only displays after you do a action, a function, or use a tool. So this is another hard part if you've never used 3D software before, but I'm hoping that we can get comfortable with navigating around the viewport. So in the top corner on the left side of the screen, you can see that there is a gizmo. This is called a gizmo, and it shows you the global axes. So we have the X, Y, and Z axes that you can navigate around. So if I go back into Blender and I go up to the gizmo and I press down, I press left click, you can rotate around the object. What's also handy about this is you can click on one of these points. So say I want to see it from the X view. This gives you I guess, the back orthographic view. And orthographic basically means just a 2D image of your 3D model. When we go ahead and move this, it goes back into your perspective. This can be really helpful if you bring in, let's say, a 2D image of something that you want to model as your reference image. You can go in and look at it in orthographic view and model your object based on that 2D image. Next, we have the zoom function. So the zoom function allows you to zoom in and out of your workspace. You can just use your middle mouse scroll wheel to scroll in and out, to zoom in and out. But if you also go down and click this and drag your mouse, you can also zoom in and zoom out. So this is whatever you feel comfortable with. Next, we have pan. Panning is actually like moving around your workspace. So if you click this hand icon and drag your mouse, you can pan around your workspace. But if you hold Shift and middle mouse button at the same time, you can also pan. And this becomes really helpful. So this shortcut we will be using quite a lot. Next is our camera view. So if you have a numpad, it would be the command and shortcut is the 0 on the numpad. If you don't, pressing this camera icon helps. So you have to have a camera within your 3D viewport to be able to toggle to the camera view. So if we click this, we see that our camera is focused on our object. And in order to render your 3D model, you do need a camera within your viewport. So this is very important to your final render. And you can zoom in and zoom out. And then if you click out of it, you get out of that camera view. The last function in this little side panel is the plane icon. And this allows you to, if you click on it, you can go to the user's orthographic view. So again, that 2D image of a 3D object. So you can see the perspective there. And if you ever lose your object and lose where you are, you can always press numpad period. It will get you back to your object. If you don't have a numpad, you can also do this by selecting your object in the outliner, push the tilde and say view selected, and it will take you back to where you can view your object. So moving on to tools, you can see your toolbar. If you press T, you can make it visible or turn it off. And this gives you different options to transform your 3D model. So moving, you can use the G function or press this on the side. And when you press the move key on the toolbar, you will see that this gizmo pops up in the center of your object or where the origin of your object is. And that, if you look right here, it's this little orange dot. And so the origin will most always be in the center of your object. But if you move the origin somehow, you can always right click and go set origin and move it to the center of your mass, volume, or the 3D cursor. And that 3D cursor is this little doodad right in the center with the lines and the crosshair. So with this, you can see that you have to have an object selected for you to see this gizmo. But if you rotate, you can see that you can actually move your objects based on the axes. And this is really helpful for transforming your object, moving your object, and stuff like that. Make sure, though, that if you click this, we go back to select after so that we can select our objects. Another way to do this is by pressing G. So if I press G, my object, I can grab my object. But if, say, I want to move it along the X axis, after I press G once, I can press X, and you can see it snaps to that axis. If I press Y or Z. So this can be really helpful to do quick moving if you don't want to go into that tools panel on the side. Next, I'll just stay in Blender, is the rotate tool. And this allows you to, again, rotate your objects based on your axes. And this can be really helpful, again, when trying to transform your object. If you press R, you can also rotate your object. And again, you can press Z, X, or Y to rotate that object locked onto the axes. And if you don't want to actually set the transform that you're doing, you can press escape and it will exit out of that tool. Next is the scale tool, and this allows you to scale your object. So again, along the axes. The only advantage of using this tool instead of using the shortcut S is that you can actually transform your objects along two axes. So say I want to scale the Z and the Y axis. if I press this button right here, this square that's red, which is the x-axis, which you can see up here in the gizmo, I can scale my object along 2 axes instead of 1. If you're using the shortcut S, you are unable to do this. So that's one advantage of using this tool on the sidebar. And lastly is the transform tool, and this just gives you all of your options in one. So if you don't want to use the shortcuts, I would recommend using this last tool, the transform tool, which allows you to manipulate your mesh in any way you want. Next is your modes. We are going to be using both object mode and edit mode. And to switch between these, the shortcut is tab, but you can also switch your mode up here in the header by clicking object mode and going to edit. But if you click tab, it takes you in and out of edit mode. The difference between object mode and edit mode is object mode, you are transforming the data within that object. So that is like a container where all of your data points, your edges, vertices, and faces are stored. If we go into edit mode, you can see that I actually have my vertices. I can select vertices, and you can also select faces and edges. So the shortcuts for these are 1 for vertices, 2 for edges. You can see that edge is selected, and 3 for faces. Or right next to that edit mode, you can toggle between all of them. So this is going to be important because we're going to want to manipulate each data point differently. So being able to switch between a vertex, an edge, and a face is quite important. Next and last, I believe, in this lecture portion of the workshop is shading modes. So there are various different shading modes in the header that you can toggle between to see your object in different light. The first is wireframe, and this displays the edges of the object, as you can see here, and it is this button up here. Then you have solid mode, and this is the default mode that Blender loads your model, your meshes into when you add a new mesh or open a new file. And this just shows your mesh in a solid view. Next, we have material preview, which is important when we're adding materials to our objects and we want to see the different colors going into material preview. Doesn't use the final rendering or the graphics card that you're using in your computer. It allows you to quickly see what colors you're adding and textures you're adding to your model without using any light. Lastly, the render mode is showing your model in its final state. So as you can see, there's a lot of shadows, and this shows your object as it would be in the real world. So trying to make it as realistic as possible, which includes lighting. So if you don't have any light in your scene, your object is going to be really dark. So adding lights into that final render mode is really important. We are going to be modeling a coffee mug today. So this is a coffee mug that I've modeled, and you guys can create your own and your own spins on it. So you can make it look very different from mine. But this is our final goal. So for the remainder of this workshop, I'm going to be in the Blender interface itself. If you guys feel like your interface is a little too small, you can make it bigger by going to Edit, going down to Preferences. And if you go to Interface, you can move your Blender interface to make it bigger. So it's defaulted on 1 right there. And how I slid the bar is if you press and hold within any slider boxes in Blender and move your mouse back and forth, it moves the number. If you want it to be a little bit more fine-grained, you hold down in this sliding box and hold Shift, and you can see the increments are much smaller. All right, so to get started, we are going to delete everything in our viewport. So I'm going to go back into object mode if I wasn't already, and I'm going to go back to the select box. This just makes it a little easier to navigate. So to start, I'm just going to hover over everything, make sure it's selected, press X, and delete. So now we have a clear viewport where we can import a cylinder to make our mug. And so to import a cylinder, we are going to press Shift A, and you can see this add menu comes up. We are going to go down to mesh and then go down to cylinder. And we are just going to click that once and we can see that a cylinder is added. So now that our cylinder is added, I want it to be sitting above the y-axis that you can see here. So I'm going to make sure that my cylinder is selected. I'm going to press G, and G is move, or you can think of it as grab to make it a little bit more easier to remember the shortcut. I'm going to grab it, and then I'm going to press Z, and I'm just going to move it up a little. Doesn't have to be perfect. I just like having my objects above that line because we will be importing other objects like a table to set it on top. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be floating higher in your space, however you feel most comfortable. So now that we have our cylinder up in place, now it's time to actually edit the data within our cylinder object. So we are going to tab into the edit mode, and we are going to make sure that we are in the face select mode. So either by pressing 3 or coming up here and pressing the face select. You'll see that everything's selected right now. If you click off of it, you will deselect everything. So left click off of it, and we are going to click the top face. And we can see that the top face is selected because it's highlighted. So we want to give our mug some actual depth and some thickness to the actual cup. And to do this, what we're going to do is use the inset tool. So I'm actually going to hide my toolbar. So with that top face selected, we now want to inset the edges of that face to make sure that our cup actually has some depth. So to do this, I'm going to press I, and I'm going to move my mouse inwards. And I'm just going to, however you like, have some creative freedom with this so you can give it as much depth or as little depth as you want. So as we can see now, we've created all of these different edges and faces off the side of our object. And this gives the depth to the mug. One thing that I do want to preface with this is try to do this once. So one of the major things that happens in Blender for new time users is you use an operation multiple times and it creates actually multiple points. So it will create more data than you actually think you have. I will show you quickly just to demonstrate. So say I don't want this and I do Control Z, but I inset it and I'm like, oh, I don't like that thickness. I want to inset it a little bit more. And I press I again and I inset it. Now you can see that we have more lines or more edges. That means if I go into the vertex select, you can see that I have a lot more points. So we want to make sure that we are having the least amount of data that we are creating, because you can also create vertices on top of vertices, which can make tools not function correctly. In order to change this, or to make sure that you don't have as many vertices in your model, what we can do is we can press A, and A is like Control A or a Command A on Mac to select everything. Then we can click M for merge. And if you merge by distance at the bottom here, we can see I don't have anything that is stacked on top of each other, but if you have vertices that were, say, stacked on top of each other, this is going to remove that. So if, as we're going through this tutorial and one of your tools isn't working like you're seeing it on my screen, push A, then M, and then merge by distance. And you can see down in your status bar if you had multiple iterations of the same vertices, because that is something that definitely happens when you're first time modeling. Okay, so now that we have the depth of our mug, we actually want to make the interior of the cup. And so the easiest way to do this is going to that gizmo in the top corner and pressing X. Now we can see that our object is in the right orthographic view and will allow us to bring that face that we have selected. So we have this top inner circle face selected. We press X up in the gizmo, and we are going to go in what is called X-ray mode. And this really helps when you're trying to look through your object to change and edit the data that you can't see. So to get to the X-ray mode, we can press Alt-Z, and you can see this is now in X-ray mode by all of these dots. Another way to get into X-ray mode is actually going to the top where we have our shading modes and toggling this button on and off. So that's two ways that you can get into X-ray mode. For the majority of this workshop, I am going to be using Alt-Z. And again, you can find all of your shortcuts at the top of the instructions. And now we are going to actually bring that face down to create the interior of the mug. So how to do this is we're going to press E, and E is the extrude shortcut. So when we press E, we can see if we are in this orthographic view, it immediately snaps to the Z axis. If it does not, just make sure you press E and then Z. And we are going to move our mouse down. And I'm just going to leave some space because our mug doesn't go all the way to the bottom to be able to create the interior of the mug. And I am now going to toggle out of the X-ray mode. And if I move my cursor and orbit around my object by holding the middle mouse button, you can see now that we've made the interior of our mug. And all of this information, if you do run behind, is in the materials and on the instructions. So for those who are online, you can find all of the instructions in the instruction document in the box folder. Okay, so now that we have the interior of our mug, we need to start creating the handle. So we have the cup, but now we need the handle. So I'm going to toggle out of X-ray mode by pressing Alt-Z, pushing that middle mouse button to rotate up to see that I created the interior of my mug. And now we are going to want to create our handle. One thing I also want to preface is with Blender, there are multiple ways to do different things. So some people might model this mug differently than I am, but I'm trying to do it the easiest and also using the most tools. So there is not always one way to do something. There are multiple ways to do something to get the same effect. So that's something also to note. So to create the handle, we are going to make some loop cuts. And to create a loop cut, we are going to press Control R. And this gets a loop cut. And a loop cut is basically a cut around the faces of your mesh. After we pressed Control R, we are now going to use our middle mouse button and scroll up once to create two loop cuts. Then we are going to double left click. And now we should have our loop cuts placed on our mesh. And this is step 8 in the instructions. So now that we have our loop cuts on our mug, I don't necessarily want my handle to be this small because I can't fit my hand in it. So I'm going to want to move these loop cuts further apart so that I'm able to have a handle that I could actually fit my hand in if this were a cup in front of me. So to do this, we want to make sure that our edge loops are selected. If perhaps you clicked off of your model and your edge loops aren't selected anymore, you can reselect them by holding Alt and pressing left click. So this will allow you to select any loop cut or edge loops that you have in your model. And because I want both of them selected, we can press Shift, Alt, and left click, and then we have both of them selected. So if we hold Shift and select with anything with our left click, you can see that it adds the data point, whichever one we're selecting. So right now I'm selecting edges. It adds that data to my selection. If I want to unselect these, I can hold Shift again and click them again. So with our edge loops selected, I want to make my handle a little larger. So in order to do this, we are going to scale these loop cuts up. So I'm going to press S, and I want to scale them on the Z axis. So I'm going to press Z after S, and I'm going to move my mouse out away from the model within the viewport. And I think that looks about good for where my handle is going to go. And again, this can be all creative expressions. So you can make your mug. If you have a favorite mug at home, you can try to model that. But we just want to get the shape of the mug and the handle correct. Say you're trying to scale this and it's not working. Press A, M, and then go merge by distance. And you can see that some of your vertices will go away. And then you should be able to reselect those edge loops and move them apart. So now that we have our edge loops, we don't want just a face connecting our object, because that will just be a flat handle. So we want to add some depth to these edge loops so that we can actually have that handle. So if I were to say extrude this face, it's just going to be a flat plane. So we want some depth to that handle. And to do this, we are going to make sure again that our loop cuts are selected, and we are going to press Control B. And again, if you are online and are behind a little, it is going to be step 8. So to do this, we're going to press Control B, and this is our bevel tool. And we're just going to move our cursor out. If you want to be a little bit more granular with the increments, you can hold Shift, and you can see that moving your mouse makes the bevel move a little smoother. So we are going to move that out. And I'm going to make a fairly thick handle, I think, today. And you can do this however thick you want. And if, again, your loop cut is not beveling to create thickness, make sure you press A, then M, then merge by distance. So now that we have the depth to our handle, I'm going to select 2 different faces that I want to extrude my handle from. So make sure that we're in face select mode by pressing 3. So now that I'm in face select mode, I'm going to click 2 faces that I want my handle to come from. This does not necessarily matter. You can click it wherever you want because we can always rotate around our object. So I'm just going to click these 2 faces, and to click both of them, remember to hold Shift and click your left mouse button. And remember that you can always pan around your object by using these tools on the side, or by holding Shift and clicking the middle mouse button, or just by clicking the middle mouse button. And you'll see me over down in this corner doing this quite a bit to navigate around my model. And how quick I'm modeling definitely comes with practice. So don't feel discouraged that it's taking you longer to navigate the 3D viewport. So with the 2 faces selected that I want to extrude my handles from, we are now going to actually extrude them. So to do this, we are going to press E. And we want to do this a very little amount of extruding these faces out. If we extrude them too far out, how we're going to make the handle, you're going to get like the St. Louis arch as a handle. Unless you want an arch handle, that might be maybe you're creating a St. Louis themed mug. You can extrude that out a little, but we can then go back and refine this. So what I'm going to do with those 2 faces selected by, remember, clicking Shift, holding Shift and left clicking, I'm now going to extrude them. So I'm going to press E, and I'm going to move them out slightly. So now you can see we're starting to create our mug. So now that we have these faces extruded a little, this is where we are going to go and change the transformation orientation. So this is step 11 on the instructions. So we need to change the orientation from using the transformation of the global scene. So using these axes here, looking at the normals. So this is just for educational purposes, you guys do not have to toggle this on, but as you can see, we have all of these arrows almost pointing out of our object. This is the quote unquote exterior normal of the object. So if for some reason you are looking at the interior of your object, we wouldn't be seeing these lines coming out. showing the normals. And so also all the data points have normals. So let me just toggle all of these on. So we can see that the faces in the blue have a normal. Each data point has a normal, or multiple normals actually, as you can see. And then each line, these very faint light blue colors, also have a normal. And this is the exterior, the way that we can extrude the object and how light bounces off of the object. So I'm just going to turn these off so we don't see them anymore. In order to do this next transformation, we actually need to use the normals. So to do this, we are going to go up to this header panel where it says global in the middle. We're going to click this little caret and go to normal and click normal and make sure it says normal up at the top. So now that this is in normal, we want to move our handles a little bit more so that they can create a nice rounded handle. To do this, I'm going to press 2 or come up here and select the face select mode. Then I am going to select the bottom edge of my extruded handle and holding shift, select the top edge. So the edges, the extruded edges that are parallel to one another. So now that we have these selected, we want to move them and rotate them in a little bit to make sure that our handle is not the arch. So to make it a little bit more smooth. And to do this, after selecting these edges that are parallel to each other, we're going to want to move them by pressing G and then Z and moving these in closer to the mug. Again, this is up to your creative inspiration, so you can do however, move it however much you want, and you'll see how the handle is created in the next step. All right, moving to step 12 in the instructions. We now want to extrude these faces to touch each other. You could do this using the extrude tool, but that would be very tedious. So Blender has some fun tools that allows us to do this instantaneously. So what we're going to do again is we're going to go into face select mode by pressing 3. We're going to select our handle faces. And then we are going to press Control E, which brings up the edge panel or the edge options. And it's the third option down. We're going to say bridge edge loops. So, but now you can see that this doesn't really look great. So if you click off of this, you won't be able to do it. So you're going to have to press Control Z. Control Z is your friend in Blender. But we need to go down to this last operations panel. So it should say bridge edge loops. We're going to click this last operations panel in the left corner of the 3D viewport. And we are going to increase the number of cuts. So right now we just have 0. I'm going to change mine to 20 and press enter. And now you can see that our handle is nicely bridged. And you can play with the number here. I'm doing 20 because I want a smooth edge. But again, creative freedom, you can change this to be as many cuts as you want. So now that we've created our handle, we do not need to edit any of our data points anymore or right now. So I'm going to hit Tab and we are going to go back into object mode. We can do this again in the top left corner of the header. We can go into object mode. Now you can see if you rotate around your object, we have a Lego brick mug. We want to make this look realistic. So we are going to add modifiers. A modifier is Blender's way of adding different tools or using different tools to your object in a non-destructive way, meaning that we are not manipulating any of our data points. So if we remove this modifier tool, it will not change those data points in our mug. To get to our modifier panel, we are going to go into our properties panel found on the right right corner of our Blender interface. And then we are going to go to this wrench icon right here. And I included an image of the wrench icon in the instructions. And we are now on step 13. So when we click this modifiers button here, you can see that we have this add modifiers. So what we're going to do is we are going to make sure that our cup is selected, or a cylinder up here. So we can make sure it's selected up in our outliner or click it in the viewport. We are going to press add modifier, and this add modifier search panel comes up, and we are just going to type in there subdivision surface, and we are going to make sure we press subdivision surface. So as you can see, our cup is now getting a little, and our mug is getting a little smoother. So what we're going to want to do is you get some options here in the modifiers properties pane. And we are going to increase the levels in the viewport to 2 and levels in render to 3. And this just subdivides it further within our viewport, but we are even further subdividing it in our render shading mode. So right now we don't want the same level of subdivision because it will slow our machine down. Now that we have our mug subdivided and somewhat smooth, you can see if we zoom in, our edge is a little thin for me. And also if you pan over and orbit over the mug, you can see that there's all this distortion in here, and we want to fix this. So to fix it again, we need to go and edit our data points. So to do this, we are going to press tab and go into edit mode. And I'm just going to click off my model and make sure nothing is selected. Now that we're in tab mode, we are going to, or edit mode, sorry, excuse me, we are going to want to redefine the edge of our mug. And to do this, we are going to again use the loop cuts tool, which is Control R. So when I press Control R, I'm going to hover. You can see all of where it can create cuts, but I'm going to hover over near the top edge of my cup, my mug, and I'm going to press once down, and then you can move your mouse up and down. So if I click down here and zoom in, you can see that I've given my mug a little bit more shape on the lip. And if you don't like where you placed your loop cut and clicked off of it and want to move it after you've set it down, remember you can press Alt, left click, and you'll get that loop cut. To move it, we're going to push G, but we're going to press G twice. And pressing G twice allows you to move edges along the face that you created it on. So this will allow me to slide it up and down on that face without moving it outwards or along a different axes. So you press G twice and I can move it up. But you can also, again, slide the edge using that last operations panel that pops up in the left corner of your viewport. So now that I did and made the outside edge of our mug smooth, I'm now going to want to do it to the inner edge. So I'm going to press Control R again, and you can see that a loop cut popped up. I'm going to click once, and now I'm just going to drag this up. I'm going to kind of create a harsher edge for the top of my mug. But then again, if we look into our mug, we can see that there's all of this distortion. So we're going to want to get rid of this distortion. And to do this, the easiest way to do this is going into our X-ray mode. So pressing Alt Z or coming up to the header on the left side and toggling into X-ray mode. So after we've toggled into X-ray mode, we are going to make sure we're on face select by pressing 3 or by coming up to the right or left-hand side of our header and pressing this select face mode. And we are going to want to select the innermost face. So this can be kind of hard to do in X-ray mode, but when you're in X-ray mode with face select on, you see all of these little dots. If I want to select one of these edges, I have to press very close to that dot in order to select it. And if I go out of X-ray mode you can see I have that face selected, but I can't see it. So this is why it's handy to have that X-ray mode so you can see inside of your model and manipulate the geometry that way. So going back into the X-ray mode, which you can toggle on and off by clicking this button up in the right-hand corner of the header, or also pressing Alt-Z. We're going to select that inner face, and now we're going to inset that face outwards. So what I'm going to do is press I, and I'm just going, instead of dragging it inwards, I'm going to drag it all the way out. And if I toggle out, you can see now that there's a lot less distortion from that modifier. And basically we are creating two sets of edges on each other. So now that we have this a little better, there's still a bit of distortion here. So what I'm gonna do again is I'm gonna press Control R, get that loop cut, click once, and I'm gonna drag it down. And you can now see that the interior of our mug is defined. So now that we did these processes to the mug to define it, if we go and look at the bottom of our mug, you can see that now there are some distortions now. So what we're going to do again is we are going to toggle into X-ray mode by pressing Alt-Z. I'm going to make sure that I am in face select mode by pressing 3, select our bottom face. If you don't go into X-ray mode, it might be a little easy just to make sure you've selected that bottom. With the bottom face selected, we are again going to press I and then click down, and we want that to be outwards. So now we get a nice flat bottom to our mug. And you don't have to make it flat. If you want to, you can only inset it a little bit and then do a loop cut around the bottom edge to create a curved mug. But I'm just going to make it straight on the bottom. So now that I'm happy with the body of my mug, I'm going to move over to the handle of my mug. So again, remember when we were extruding those faces to create the handle of our mug, if we extruded them too far out, it might create some pulling or tension here that we might not like. So in order to edit this, what we're going to do is press Control R and make sure that you're hovering over the loop cut closest to your handle. You can press once, and again, we can move that in or out. I'm pretty happy with how mine is, so I'm going to push Escape and Control Z to get rid of that. But if you want to refine your mug a little bit more along the handles, you can just add more loop cuts by Control R and making sure that you are putting your cursor. If you want a loop cut to go around your handle, make sure you're putting it on the perpendicular edge of where you want your loop cut to go. So if I'm in Control R, you can see I'm hovering over this top edge to make sure that I am cutting in the direction I want. If I'm going on here, you can see that my edge loop is now perpendicular. And that is step 15 on our instructions. All right, for those of you who are at the step that I am at and you're happy with your mug, we are going to now make the mug look a little nicer and actually add color to it. So the fun part, in my opinion. So to do this, we are going to press Tab, or going up to the left header and going into object mode. Now that we're in object mode, we're going to pull up the object tab. You can either go here in the header to object, or you can right click on the object, and we are going to press Shade Smooth. Make sure, oh, and you saw that didn't work. It's because I didn't have my mug selected. So make sure your mug's selected prior to doing that. So now that my object or mug is selected, I'm going to press my right click and then left click Shade Smooth. And now you can see that our object looks like a smooth mug. All right, so now that we have our mug modeled and you're happy with it, we are going to add and apply a material to it. So to do this, we are going to make sure our mug is selected again, and we're going to go back to that properties pane or properties panel, and we are going to go to the last icon in this this panel, material. We're going to click on that material button. Now that we've selected the material, we want to add a new material. So I'm just going to click add new, and this might take a second. So now you should be getting this more in-depth properties for your material. And to change our material, we're going to go to the base color, which is the second option, and we're going to click inside the box where it's white. And now that we've clicked inside this box, we can use the color picker by left clicking and dragging our mouse to make our mug whatever color we want. And you can also change the hue by using this slider as well. Yes, so to preview the color on your mug, what you're going to have to do is change your shading modes from solid to material preview. And once you do that, now you can see the color. And if I go back into my base color and go to my color picker, now you can see the color actually changing on the mug. Now that I'm happy with my color, it looks a little matte, and I want my mug to be glossy to look like glaze. So what I'm going to do is in this properties panel again, I'm going to go to roughness, which is 2 down from the base color. And I am going to slide my cursor over so it looks a little bit more glossy, like I glazed my mug. Again, you can go here if you left click in this sliding box and move your mouse back and forth. You can move the amount of roughness that you have on your mug. So now that I'm happy with the gloss of my mug, now we actually want to add the mug to something. We don't just want it floating in our 3D viewport. So what we're going to do is add a table. To do this, I am going to click off of my mug. I'm going to press Shift A to bring up that add panel, and I'm going to add a plane mesh. So we go in mesh, plane. You can also add mesh by going up to this button up here on the header on the left side, add mesh plane. So now that I added a plane, it looks very small compared to my mug. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to select my plane, and I'm going to press S for scale, and I'm going to scale that as large as I want. Now you can see you have a plane. And most of you probably don't have your mug on top of your plane, and that's okay. We're going to do that next. So you can see if I'm going into my orthographic view, you can see my mug is floating on top of my plane. So now that we have the table, as I'm calling it, or plane, in our 3D viewport, I'm going to want to take our mug and snap it to our table. To do so, I'm going to go up and enable the snapping tool. And the snapping tool is found in the header in the middle near the transformation orientation, and it's a little magnet icon. And so I'm just going to press that once, and you can see now it looks like it's magnetizing something. Now that I have the snapping tool on, I'm going to select my mug. I'm going to press G, and then I'm going to press Z, and I'm going to move my mug to snap onto my object. Because my mug was so close to it, I'm going to have to move it up and then move it back down. So again, G, Z. I'm going to set it here. Now I'm going to click it again, and I'm going to push again, G, Z, and move that down. It should be snapping well. And if you're having this issue, you can toggle out of snap, and you can actually move it more granularly by holding shift. So G, Z, then shift, and then you can place your mug on top. And it might be easiest if you go into either the X or the Y view to make sure your mug is on your cup. And sometimes you can get your mesh to go through your plane. So to fix that, I'm just going to go into my right orthographic view by pressing X. I'm going to grab my mug again with G. I'm going to press Z, and I'm just going to move it up slightly. So now you can see I don't see my mug through the table. And make sure after you've snapped your mug to the table that you turn off that snapping tool. So now we're going to want to put a texture to our table, or a material. So we're going to go back to that properties panel, making sure that our plane is selected, and we are going to press new. Now that we've created a new material, you can see that it's white. We're going to want to change it from that color picker to an image texture. To do this, under base color, we are going to press that yellow circle right next to base color. And you can see that all of these different nodes, as they're called, pop up. And we are going to go under texture. We're going to go to image texture. Now that we have the image texture on our base color, we're going to select open, and we are going to open that table JPEG that is in the materials folder and box that I've sent you guys. And once we import that image, you can see now that we have a wood grain table. So now that we have our mug on a table, we are almost done. So the last thing we're going to have to do in order to render our image is to actually add a light. So to do this, we are going to go and press Shift A, and we are going to navigate to light closer to the bottom. And we are going to click area. We're going to add an area light. Now you can see our light is actually under our table. So we're going to have to move that up. And to do so, let's make sure our light is selected. It might be easier to select our light in our outliner pane in the top left corner of the interface. Select that. What we're going to do is press G, and then we're going to press Z, and we're going to just move that light upwards. So now that our light is above our mug, it's pretty small. So we're going to want to scale that up by pressing S and moving our mouse outwards to create a larger area light. So now that we have our light added, we're going to want to change our wattage of our light so it is a little bit more intense. And to do this, we are going in our properties pane, we're going to go down to data, or this light bulb, so lighting data button. And we are going to change the power of the light to 200. So I'm just going to press once in there with the left click. I'm going to type 200 and enter. You can also, if you're being very creative, you can change the color of your light by pressing color, and you can change your color there. I'm just going to leave it as the default color now. And now we are done with our 3D model. In order to view it in its full rendered form, we're going to have to change the shading mode. So to change the shading mode, we're going to go up to that header in the top, and we're going to click this last rendered shading mode, press that once, and now you can see your rendered object. If you want to create an image of your mug, you will have to add a camera. And I did not include this camera step in the final render, but to do this, we can press Shift A, go to camera to add our camera. Then I find it the easiest to move the camera by clicking either numpad 0 or clicking on this camera button right here to move to the camera. And while I'm in the camera, I'm going to press Z and I'm going to move it. This can be kind of hard to do, so it might be easier also to get out of it. Press G to move it out, going back here. Now that I can go into my camera view, I can also press G and move it out. And then I'm gonna click it again. And this is just takes a bit of trial and error to get your camera placed in your scene. So pressing G, I can snap it to any of my vertices, but I'm just gonna press G and move this back a little. Then you can see. The camera can be quite challenging for new users. That's why I didn't add it in this step, but you can also press S to scale your camera, and then you can go back in and move it while you're in the camera view. And if you want to render your final JPEG of your image, we go up to this render panel and we click render image. And it will take a second, but you can see it then renders your object. And this doesn't look the best, and that's because we didn't play with the render settings. To play with the render settings, to make it render nicer, we can go over to the properties pane, click on this render, so this little camera icon at the very top, click on this, and under render engine, Eevee is the built-in rendering engine for Blender. But we can go down and we can press cycles, and then we can change the device from CPU to GPU, so from to our graphics card. If we click this, you can see my cup looks a lot better. And we can go in and again render an image. And it will take a little bit longer. So we can see right here, we're getting a 40K image with my computer. You probably won't be able to get a 40K image on these computer lab computers, and depending on your graphics card. But now you can see that you have your final rendered cup. Now you have modeled your first object in Blender. So what you can do if you want to show your friends, you can go up to File, and you can save or save as, either one. That's it for the Blender workshop. Thank you for everybody who came in to participate. Hopefully we will be doing more 3D workshops in the future. Thank you for joining. If you can, please follow this QR code to give us some feedback on the workshop.